Just as an aside, what day do you do mastery on, Neil? Do you do it on Tuesdays? Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Neil Almond.
Lovely to be here.
And Dave Taylor.
Hi, Kieran. Thanks for having me.
Now, this week, the focus is going to be backward faded examples. But first, Neil, what you reading for?
Hey, what you reading for?
So I've fallen down a bit of a morphology rabbit hole. And so recently I've been reading a paper called How Morphology Impacts Reading and Spelling, Advancing the Role of Morphology in Models of Literacy Development. And this is by Kyle Levesque, Helen Breadmore, and S. Deacon, and they kind of just take you through a couple of highlights from what is already known kind of about morphology. But the main thing that I love about this paper is that it's very clear, black and white. They just talk very easily, and they literally have a section that says highlights what was already known about this topic, what this paper adds to that kind of knowledge, and then the implications that this has for further reading. So in their words, they feel this paper adds recent empirical evidence to specify the multiple roles of morphology in literacy development. And they present this morphological pathway framework, which identifies explicit mechanisms between morphology and literacy skills and guides its inclusion into theory. So if you're interested in morphology, and if you caught Mark McCourt's talk about what the Romans did for us, there's plenty of morphological thinking going on there in that particular talk. Quite an interesting paper as to what's going on within the mind on that one. Dave, what are you reading for?
I found a little bit of time this week to read some snippets of Ollie Lovell's Tools for Teachers book, which is, I guess, learnings from the Education Research Reading Room podcast. I don't find a lot of time to read, but that's a bit that I've been dipping into.
Nice. I've also read, well, haven't finished, but the first chapter we were talking about, Dave, on explicit instruction is really, really good, isn't it? So well worth.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
I've been reading, it's an interesting paper. It's about this project from the 1980s, and it's by Alan Schoenfeld, and it's called Expert and Novice Mathematical Problem Solving. Not entirely convinced many direct applications in the classroom, but an interesting sort of history of problem solving thought at that time. So that, like you say, you're going down this morphology rabbit hole, Neil. I've gone down a bit of the history of problem solving and what people thought in the past. And this one's got your classic US Department of Education stamp. And then that, nice. That funny text you get where it's like, is this from a book, or it's definitely not a PDF. So this week, backward faded examples is the focus. Dave, you are our resident expert, and Neil and I will be putting you through your paces. But I thought it might be interesting for anyone, who isn't aware of your work. Give yourself a short introduction. Let us know who you are.
Okay. I wrote some things down so I don't forget things. I'm Dave Taylor. I am a secondary maths teacher from Leeds, where I work in a school 3 days a week, and I work for Complete Maths 2 days a week. I am on Twitter at TaylorDA01, and I have a website at TaylorDA01.weebly.com, where you can find sets of increasingly difficult questions and backward faded maths tasks. I guess it's called backward faded maths. I guess that's why I'm here today. You're
also the host of a podcast that both Neil and I have featured on recently. What's that about, Dave?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forget all of my multifaceted and my, all my talents. I am the host of a podcast called Teaching Together, the podcast from Complete Mathematics, where we look at a single objective in detail from the Complete Maths curriculum to improve our
Teaching together.
Teaching
There we
together.
That's the best fit.
Yeah, it's the only reason I agreed to go on it. Just 'cause I got to do that.
I mean, it's fantastic because essentially by the end of this first run of episodes, you're aiming to have an episode for every like sort of granule in the complete maths universe.
There's only 1,800, so having done 18 episodes so far, we're about 1% of the way through. So I'm gonna be in a job for a while.
And I guess then you could roll it out to the English and science curriculum that's now become available too.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll do what Kieran does, and I'll just be the host and invite other people on to lead those conversations.
Oh, you don't know how good it is, Dave. Sometimes I don't say anything at all except for the questions. I can just sit back on a Wednesday night and go, oh, yeah. I mean, if we try to do all of the objectives on the English curriculum, we'd be...
I mean, I do need a job for a while. My electricity bills keep rising, so...
Yeah, don't go there.
I keep on telling Dave as well, he'll get all to 1,800 and then, there'll be a curriculum reform, so you have to rejiggle a few things and then just start the whole thing again.
Yeah.
Have you used any of the slides in class, Neil? Because obviously we've done a few from the sort of stage 1 to 6 ballpark, and you've written one. Did you use them in class before you wrote them?
Not yet, no, but I've signed part to teachers who I know are, when they come to teaching volume of a cuboid, and from stage 5, I think. And I think Dave and I recorded some early algebra from stage 6. So I've kind of signposted them to that and say, listen to the podcast, follow that link to the Google Slides, and that will give you a fantastic start for teaching that small little granule. So looking forward to them using it and hopefully seeing some results with that.
Looking forward to the feedback.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, it's just the right size as well. It's like, what, 15, 20 minutes, as long as Stuart's not involved.
Yeah, if Stuart's involved, it turns into more like 45. 35 with a bit of clever editing.
I think it makes sense to start with some definitions. When we say backward faded examples, Dave, what do we mean?
So backward faded examples are sets of worked examples where the latter solution steps are faded in subsequent examples to give completion problems. So to give an example, I would take a question. I would write a fully worked example for it, and then I would write a similar question with the solution steps completed until the final step and omit that. And then I'd write another one and then omit the final 2 solution steps. And then the final problem that I include on the worksheets that I put together is a 4th one that is just for pupils to go out by themselves.
What sort of situation are you using them in? Are you using them as part of your instruction or practice?
So I guess that the way that I've mostly used them is when I'm responding to kids and their answers in tests. When I know that the pupils have all the prerequisite parts to succeed at this thing, but they just don't have the understanding of how to put it together. And I think that this is the main aim of using backward fading as an instructional technique. I think that the way that we get the most out of them is for things that require greater thought and the use of flexible knowledge. So I'd avoid using them for something like adding fractions, but I would use them for when pupils are using the idea of adding fractions in some sort of like worded non-routine problem. A nice simple example would be maybe Kieran eats half a pack of biscuits, Neil eats a third of the pack of biscuits. What fraction of the pack of biscuits is left?
Just a few kind of practicalities on this one, Dave. Kind of like, is this something that you've like pre-prepared, so like you just know I can go to like the next slide and it's there, or are you at the point where your mastery of backward fading examples is so strong that you can almost just knock these out in class with with live, as it were?
I mean, I have some colleagues who knock everything out live, and that's not for me. That I am well prepared for most things that I can be well prepared for. So I'll come with a stack of backward faded sheets, because what I don't want the pupils to be writing things down in their exercise book and then looking up, and then that up and down motion adding to their cognitive load. The reason that I'm doing this is that the cognitive load within the problem is high enough to cause them a problem. So I need to reduce the cognitive load as much as possible and direct their, direct their attention and use the germane cognitive load as best as I can to try and foster some understanding with this idea.
Yeah, even the fact that you're talking about how you're trying to control for cognitive load and things shows that this isn't something you're going to make up on the hoof. You're putting a lot of thought into the preparation. So yeah, that makes total sense. How can we get the most from backward faded examples?
Some kids really like them and others don't. So if I use my year 10s as an example, we were doing bearings and we were trying to find a location from two bearings, and my year 10s were having difficulty with that. So I faded it. I gave them the fully worked solution, drawing the bearing from A, drawing the bearing from B, and then where the two lines cross, that's where C is. And then I faded that out by drawing the bearing from A and leaving the bearing from B. And then they had a completion problem to draw both. And from the 29 kids that are in the room, one's always absent. So of the 29 who are in the room, 27 of them are like, yeah, I found this really useful. And one of them he's the kid who could get a 9 now. Like he's going, yeah, I don't find this useful. And that actually makes sense because in all the literature and on the website that I've created a video for, there is a point where pupils gain expertise from being novice towards being expert. And there is a point called the expertise retrieval. It's the expertise retrieval effect. And at the point that the pupil no longer needs to self-explain this problem, they don't need the solution steps given to them. They can just do it. Whereas the other 28, they weren't expert with this idea and they needed the solution steps to guide them through it. And so it arcs back to cognitive load in so many ways, because the reason that they can't do it is it's just too much for them. Even though I know that in the example that I gave, they can add fractions, they don't see that they're supposed to add fractions when you eat a third of a pack of biscuits, Kieran, and Neil, you eat a half or whatever it was. They don't understand that they're adding fraction and then subtracting from the whole. They see that as something entirely different. And why wouldn't they, without being shown how to, I guess, problem solve within the domain of what we're covering? And I think that that's an important element of where we use backward faded examples, is we teach pupils how to problem solve. So we don't say things like, if it's tricky, draw a picky, when they have no idea what kind of picture that they're trying to draw with it, because otherwise they're just going to draw a pack of biscuits. And they're like, so I've no idea what I'm doing with this. If they've been shown the solution steps within the domain of the problem that we're working on, then they stand more of a chance of succeeding with that.
Makes sense. So obviously, as I say, Dave, you're a math specialist, so you don't kind of have that issue at primary where you have to teach one lesson and then think about very quickly, your cognitive load that needs to go back to the English lesson, the DT lesson you're going to do. So roughly, like, on average, say, like, how long would it take you to kind of come up with these problems? How many of these problems are you probably doing within a learning episode, to use the a complete maths terminology here? And what's kind of like, if it's pre-prepared, have you ever found yourself in a situation where I haven't done enough examples, so I do need to do some live, or is there always too many, so that never has to happen?
I'm not putting these in every single learning episode. Mostly I use them personally when I am responding to a test question. So it's not as though I'm trying to think these things up. I'm responsive to how my year 10s or my year 11s have done. I teach year 7, year 10, and year 11, and I've not got to a point where I've found a question that my year 7s have struggled with on the whole, that I need to backward fade it for them. So when my year 11s do an exam, and I know that I know they've got the mathematical ability to do this, and I know they've got the mathematical knowledge because they've shown me in class and they've shown me over time. And then it comes to an exam question where it phrases it a little bit differently and it absolutely throws them. That's the bit at which I start to create a resource for them, so I can put a sheet in front of them. So because it's wholly responsive, I know that they need that thing. and I can prepare that and give it them when I need it to. And so I don't find myself in the situation where I need to backward fade, I guess, on the hoof or on the fly or whatever we want to phrase that as.
Do you find you get transfer then across to different types of problems? So like in this instance, it was the problem type or the surface structure that sort of got them. Do you find you get transfer when you use the sort of the backwards fading?
Yeah, so the optimal use of backward fading would give you far transfer, and the way that pupils are sort of directed through a thought process by using them effectively means that they develop that thought process when it comes to another problem. And so, I mean, there are many pitfalls that you can find with something like backward fading. When you learn about something new, it's all you do, isn't it? Like you teach the kids how to solve quadratics, and all of a sudden, that's all they want to do. They just want to solve a quadratic. And you teach the kids like right angle trigonometry, and then you give them a Pythagoras problem, and they're like, "Sir, there are no angles." And I'm like, "Yeah, no. Maybe you should use something else that you know." And they're like, "Oh, all right, okay, yeah. What? Okay, well, this clearly isn't landing, is it?" But when a teacher finds out about backward fading, maybe they go, "Oh, this is so good. I'm going to do this with everything that I can find." And I don't think that's the solution. I think like the major pitfall that we get with backward fading and how it doesn't give us a far transfer is when teachers give too much scaffolding. And so we see maybe scaffolded worksheets as a backward faded worksheet. And I don't think that the two are the same. Like a lot of people, I say a lot of people, there are not many people creating them, but the pitfall that you find is that people give hints rather than prompts. And I mean, and Mark McCaw, when he and I were talking about backward fading, we talked about the prompts, and he said that they're not an instruction, they're a question. So the hint tells people what to do. It says you've got a rectangle of area 12 and side length 4. So the hint will say divide 12 by 4. Divide the area by the length to find the height. Whereas the prompt says, how can I find the other side length of the rectangle? And the prompt is intended to have the pupil self-explain that, well, they try to generate the hint for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
How do we find the other length in the rectangle? We divide the area by the length. And that's the answer that I give myself when I answer the question, how do we find the other length of the rectangle? And then the hint might say, add together the side lengths. Whereas the prompt will say, how do you find the perimeter of the rectangle? And so you're asking pupils to self-explain all the time. And so they're getting into the habit of looking at something and asking themselves a question about what they're trying to do with it, as opposed to always looking for an instruction to follow.
Would you say as much time is spent then thinking of the prompts as the actual question itself, or is it once you have prompts in place they can sort of be used across the board?
So the prompts they're also kind of specific, but at the same time as being specific, they're general. Like it's not, it's how do you find the perimeter? It's how do you? And so that becomes an extension of the problem solving strategy. Ask yourself, how do we? And try and get an answer from it. Writing the prompts is actually quite tough, particularly with some things, because if you're looking for something like factorizing a quadratic, I mean, what prompts can you give other than factorize a quadratic? And you're like, oh, just going to have to do that then. And there's no thought process going into it. Maybe if you're given the quadratic and the prompt is find the lengths of the rectangle, or how can we find the lengths of the rectangle? And your answer to that is, if I'm given an expression which is a quadratic, I'm going to have to factorize it to find the two lengths that are multiplied together to give that. And so the prompt there is, I mean, it's a better prompt, but is it a good enough prompt that's going to give someone who's on the novice to expert continuum, somewhere in the middle where we're seeing this expertise reverse at some point? Is the prompt going to hook that kid in and help them, or is it just going to confuse them as they were before?
I can see this being just if you put the backward fading example side of it, just to a side for a minute, like as a planning tool, just being able to have that clarity of thought as to, what question you're going to ask for kids at that point when they, might become, stuck at that point. It strikes me that you'd have a real clarity of thought and thinking as to, what happens, quite deliberately at each step. And so I think even as a tool to kind of think about just planning, it sounds particularly useful, I think, for particularly that novice teacher to actually sit down and be like, right, imagine you are asking, a question to elicit what you need to do at each step of whatever, insert X problem here. Sounds really useful. It sounds like they have to think quite deeply, one might say, about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no point just handing a sheet out to kids and saying, right, get on with this. So, I mean, you need to engage them in some way. So even the questions that they've got wrong in an exam, which is my major use of them, stick that question on the board and try and get some sort of emotional response to it. Oh, I didn't get this. And then another kid will go, oh, do I do that first? And then you can, the questions that you've already thought up, the prompts that you've already written, these are the ones that you're saying out loud to the kids while they're discussing the problem that they couldn't do. And so the way that, I mean, it's really easy to stand over a child and just tell them what to do. It is more difficult on the hoof to just think of a prompt that will get them to engage their thinking properly, that will have a deeper impact than you standing over this kid who's just not getting it, and you end up just going, dude, just factorize it. Just factorize it for me. At which point that child learned nothing. They did what you knew they could already do, but they didn't realize that that's what they should be doing. And as a result, there's no benefit from that.
Where do you display the prompts? I mean, I'm thinking, is it on the board? Is it an additional piece of paper? I mean, I think in secondary school, it's slightly different from primary. In primary, we can probably double back it and put it on the wall so that everyone can see it all the time. But it does, because you guys are changing classrooms, that's not necessarily the case. What's your, how could you do this with the least effort possible?
So because the prompts are specific to the question that they've been asked, they are printed next to the solution steps. And so the prompts will be on the left, and then the first solution step will be on the right, and then second prompt, second solution step, and all the way down. And then the prompts remain there. And what's an interesting thing to do is fade out the prompts as you fade out the solution steps. So maybe leave the final prompt in as you fade out the final solution step, and then fade out the final two solution steps and the final prompt, so that they're having to think about what that prompt was rather than just being given the prompt.
I mean, the only time I've ever really sort of experimented with prompts was the last academic year, and it was more a general how to analyze a worked example so that I think they were year 3, the last group I did this with, so they were ready to explain to another person. And so you had some general questions that focused their attention on the type of explanations they meant. But this sounds like next level, like you say, having it sort of marry up with both, I think, sounds really effective. I mean, Neil, have you tested any of this stuff out in your own classes?
Yeah, I seem to, and say Dave may tell me off.
I never tell anybody off anymore. I've learned from that.
I have used them for some like procedural things where obviously the primary, where they are far less of an expert and they're far more novices, but for things like, for those real heavy procedural things like 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication, where there just are like so many steps, and you can always like guarantee they're going to forget to drop that 0 when they're multiplying by that second multiplicand, because they just forget that you have to do that. So I have kind of used it at a point where they can just almost bit like real kind of careful, deliberate practice of, right, so I need you to add the two products together, as would be like your final step. Then I'd kind of remove that, so actually then they have the 10 has been like a 0 placeholder there already, so all they have to do is then like multiply by what would be the first of the tens digits, say, of the second number. Then you kind of remove the placeholder, so then they need to remember to put the placeholder, then kind of like fade out, and then eventually they kind of do all of their kind of stuff. Then they have to go through that whole like procedure by themselves, because I've kind of found, particularly when children aren't that confident with their own like times tables, I've found either making sure that you're multiplying by like 11 all the time, because they can go through the procedure and like the times tables aren't really an issue then, because there's multiplying by 1, and most kids know those, can do the 1 times table pretty well. And then, as I say, sometimes I've had to use those examples of like backwards fading as well to kind of just, reduce that cognitive load, just that manage that cognitive load, even more, to make sure that, I understand that right now I need them to learn this procedure. So that's what I need to make sure they do. And I have found it quite useful, I think, for that. I have looked at it with English as well. I think there's quite a few things with English that you can use them for. I remember doing a lesson with direct speech, so understanding the rules of when to use inverted commas, so where the punctuation goes, making sure you put the comma before you write down or after the reporting clause, etc., etc. So I've used them for that, where there's quite a lot of, where it's quite procedural and there's quite a lot of tiny little elements going. I just want them to kind of like practice each one individually and like gradually kind of build that expertise up in a kind of cumulative way, because I kind of feel like that's what that backwards fading allows them to do. They can practice one step quite a few times but still feel quite successful. They don't necessarily like feel like they quite enjoy it. They certainly, I think it has a bit of a novelty effect the first time you see it, and for kids who are a little bit hesitant, they seem to enjoy the fact that they can do a question quite quickly, where everybody had to do like one bit. So it's a good little confidence builder as well, I think.
Have you thought about forward fading as a technique?
Yeah, I think there's a good video, I think, by, what's his name? It's an old video. I think it's like by Fred Jones. I remember Ollie Cav tweeting it out, and it's really good. And I think he uses what we would call kind of like forward fading, where each procedure is done in order, but instead of so if you had a procedure that's like kind of 5 steps, you'd split your board into kind of fifths, and then you'd kind of have step 1, get the kids to do participate as much as possible. Then in the second one, like step 1 and 2, and then step 1, 2, 3, step 1, 2, 3, 4, and then step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so they can kind of see then how that all works. Because I remember, I think what he says in that particular video is, how about if you have a fully procedured, whatever it is, and you ask the pupil to just say, okay, so what did I do? What was the 3rd step to solve this problem? Because they're looking at a fully completed example, they can't really identify what step 3 was, because obviously working memory, they can't hold on to that information. So when you think about it, I'm going to literally compartmentalize each step so they can see how each one like builds up. They can kind of then see, okay, so that's what step 1 is, that's what step 2 is, step 3, step 4, step 5, etc., etc.
So I actually interpreted forward fading differently to that. So like how how in backward fading you fade from the end.
Yeah.
Forward fading I interpret as fading from the beginning and fading out your first solution step.
Okay.
So I spoke about this with our business studies teacher, how maybe his kids, maybe his pupils don't necessarily know how to phrase the opening of something. So maybe he's concluding that a business is profitable because of this. So maybe the final solution step is the business is profitable. And so the 3rd solution step was to calculate profit, which means that you need to calculate sales and costs. I mean, I've not done businesses since I was 16, which is it's getting on for 21 years now. But I think that if you were to give a fully worked solution and then you were to fade out the 1st step, which is calculating revenue, which in very basic terms is just number of items sold multiplied by price per item. If you don't know that's your 1st step and that's the first thing that you want them to focus on, then you can fade from the 1st solution step, but then you've still got the end thing which says that the business is or isn't profitable, which means that you've kind of got a hint there as to say that if you've got your sales, then the bit that you should get there is less than your sales.
I'll have to go back and have a look and see whether, I've no doubt your knowledge of this is far superior to mine. So I don't know what I've been doing. Maybe it hasn't.
I wouldn't be so sure.
I mean, the thing you mentioned, Neil, sounds really good. I mean, because I recommend labeling with numbers, but actually that way is a lot clearer if you break the board down into different parts. I think, that makes a whole lot of sense, because I'm literally adding extra digits to my
So you're
calculations.
working.
So I think I might test it out the next time I'm in a classroom, and I might suggest to people that they do so too.
Tables are really helpful for that kind of thing to separate things out. I mean, when I listened to Michael Persson, probably on the Mr. Bartimaeus podcast, talking about two-column proofs, I was like, what? And I've always found that when pupils are proving that two triangles are congruent, for example, their work is all over the place. And since I've started using two-column proofs, I've just chucked that into my lessons, and now I insist on pupils using a two-column proof. So when it comes to me marking their work on congruent triangles, it's just ordered and it just makes sense, and they clearly know what they're doing because it's structured, and then you don't need to number anything, and as you said, add extra digits, which probably adds to a cognitive load when a kid's looking at a fully worked solution.
So, I mean, listening to you both, I can relate, Neil, to what you're saying about how it lends itself to the procedural. So with some of the mathematics we encounter at primary, but it feels, Dave, like you're saying that we should try and push beyond that, and that this has the power to support struggling pupils realize some pretty big truths. Am I interpreting your words correctly, Dave?
I think maybe when we talk about procedural things, we're talking about scaffolding and scaffolded worksheets as opposed to backward faded. And maybe scaffolding is a bit like backward faded light, because without the prompts, you don't get the benefits of backward fading. And scaffolding clearly has its place. I mean, it's been in the classroom for decades, hasn't it? And scaffolded worksheets have always been a thing. So, I mean, it must be beneficial. But potentially it's not necessarily the same as backward fading, or it is the same as backward fading, but a bit of a simpler version of, without the prompts. And maybe the prompts is what makes this backward fading technique so impactful, more impactful than the scaffolding, because the pupil is just looking at, I mean, well, that happened last time, so I'll just do this time. And maybe it says, find the area of the rectangle. And I'm like, oh, well, I can do that. That's fine. Yep, got that. And they can go through a whole scaffolded worksheet without actually having thought about what to do. Whereas if you introduce prompts over hints, they have to self-explain the solution steps in order to get to a solution. And by self-explaining, we know that self-explaining requires pupils to think hard about it, and memory is the residue of thought, to quote Willingham.
Nice. That's really clear. And I can see the distinction. Is the reverse phase scaffold something different then? Is that a term I've heard before? Reverse phase scaffold?
I've never heard those words together. I've heard all of the words, just not as one thing.
I know all the words, just not necessarily in that.
Sir, do you know all the digits of pi? Yeah, I know all of them.
just not in the right order.
Just don't know in the right order, yeah.
So it's not that I want to add to Mr. Johnny Hall's workload, but it sounds like this could be something that you could probably automate, perhaps in like very specific types of problems and structures. Would I be right in thinking that, he probably could do something where certain prompts are available for each? If you could break down a certain question into a certain amount of steps, you could code for some prompt questions for each of those steps. And obviously there's a nice little button that regenerates it, so the problem remains the same, but the questions are different. The question remains the same, but the numbers are different, but the prompts are kind of the same, and you could kind of fade it out. Am I going to add to his workload? Are you going to tell me that I'm a fool for thinking that we can take the human thinking out of this and give it to our resident coder?
I feel as though you're describing something that already exists on Classroom, Neil.
Oh, I don't know what you mean.
No? They're called dynamic questions, and they exist for about 10% of the curriculum. I think that might be a lie. Don't hold me to that.
I'm going to find out.
We're not recording this, are we?
I'm going to hold you to that one. That'll be my next thing. Dave said that this is going to be 10% of the curriculum, and there's only done in with classroom. They don't have the prompts, do they?
Yeah, the prompts are there. Yeah, if you get onto a dynamic question, and then if you go to show the answer, then sorry, no, the prompts are not there. The solution steps are.
Yeah.
The prompts are not. But that is a plan for.
I was going to say world exclusive there. Not that, I don't want you to reveal anything that you're not allowed to say, but
I just don't see why you wouldn't include an option for prompts if you already have the facility to do that. It's just another column in a table, isn't it?
yeah.
I mean, I'm not a coder, but it sounds like a 10-second job.
Johnny says with everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is a first. Neil making product requests on our. There's a process to go through, Neil.
I say usually it's just in person at a maths con, or I just email support@completemaths.com.
I mean, you've already mentioned, Dave, the one potential pitfall, and the one that it sounds like I fall into more often than not. Are there any pitfalls that we should avoid when trying to get the most from these?
I think it's just the giving too much scaffolding. Like the purpose of using backward fading is to reduce the cognitive load, but there's a negative impact of reducing the cognitive load to zero, because then pupils aren't thinking. And if pupils are entirely automated and just following instructions, I guess like coding something, then they're not going to learn anything from it. So why bother going through the activity? Pupils need to be thinking hard for them to learn something. So the prompts have to be there to engage the student in thinking, because there is some data to this, and there are some facts about a certain proportion of the of the pupil population doesn't self-explain, and then this is why the prompts are put in there, to try and force this so that pupils don't self-explain themselves, but they do self-explain by responding to the prompts. The act of self-explaining is, the self-explanation effect says that it's a really positive thing to do, but also the anticipating what's going to come next is another really important thing to do while a teacher's modeling, sitting there and not just responding to what the teacher's going from the board, but thinking, oh, I wonder what they're going to do next. And then if you get it right, it's confirmation that you know what you're doing. And if you don't get it right, you benefit from the hypercorrection effect, whereby, oh, I was expecting something different. Oh, I should probably remember this because that's probably important. And I think that's probably where the self-explanations sort of guide you towards, in terms of the way that you are as a pupil and your learning behaviors. I am a person that self-explains. I am a person that anticipates, instead of I am a person that sits in a classroom and hopes to get better at maths or English or science by being in the same room as other people doing maths, English, and science, but not really doing much myself.
That's genius. I mean, you're making this seem really clear, Dave. I feel like I understand this a whole lot better than I did before, because, I mean, what I'm taking away is that, struggling pupils benefit from this most. Being really forensic about what it is you want to utilize, what situations you want to utilize this, and the power of prompts to support people thinking. Those seem to be the three big takeaways. Is there anything else you would add to that, Dave?
I just think, just to reiterate, the selective nature of only using it when you feel it's appropriate, as opposed to just, oh, well, we do backward fading Monday, so it's Monday, so let's do some backward fading. It's at the point where pupils are between novice and expert, and you need them to, like, they're fluent with this idea, and you can give them, like right angle trigonometry problems until the end of the lesson, and they will get every single one of them right. And so what they're doing there is they're just overlearning, which we know has no impact. And so we need to move them towards problem solving, which experts learn best from. But they're not at the stage where they can solve problems. And so where we use example problem pairs to put the idea together before they develop fluency, we're now kind of going with example problem pairs for problem solving, which are the prompts and the solution steps and the fading. And then as they build up these skills, they then move into the expert area of the continuum, and they begin to solve problems, which increases their expertise, and they become more and more expert. So I think maybe I haven't already mentioned what you kind of maybe want to do after you've given 4 problems which are faded and then 1 completion problem is just follow this up with something similar. Maybe same surface, different depth, same depth, different surface, so that pupils are able to look at the problem, unpick what the problem's asking them to do by self-explaining, and then coming to those solutions. So this thing that they couldn't do, when I talk about my experience of something that they couldn't do in an assessment or an exam, this is something that they couldn't do 20 minutes ago. They've now gone through a backward faded works example, and then I've given them 3 similar problems which have either a different surface and the same depth, or the same surface and a different depth. And if they can solve those 3 problems, then I mean you can be pretty confident that at the very least near transfer has occurred, and potentially far transfer has taken place as well.
I want to teach tomorrow. I'm like, oh, I want to try this out. I want to do this properly.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. Yeah, that I knew the prompt, you got ahead of one of my questions, which was about, I heard about the prompts and that, how important are the prompts, but it really does kind of sound like the prompts are the key, and kind of thinking about, you've explained this so well, just think about it's those prompts that actually probably make the learning happen, because those are what force the thinking to happen by engaging with those, not just the simple looking at a previous example, thinking about, okay, well, what's the next possible step. So no, as Kieran said, I'm not teaching tomorrow. I am teaching on Friday though, so year 6 Friday afternoon. So I will definitely find some time to try and write. So I might have to send them to you, Dave, if you got some time tomorrow to look over them and critique them and be honest, please, about what I come up with.
Feel free to. I mean, you appear to be moving towards backward faded Friday.
I think it's problem solving Friday, but what we're going to do now, we're now going to have regular problem solving Friday, and then every 2 weeks we'll do backward faded problem solving Friday based on the results from just problem solving Friday.
Nice. What I was just thinking about when you started talking then, Neil, was the extension prompt where you ask a pupil to give you an easy question and a hard question.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? Like previous me was like, well, why are you doing that? That's just give them something else to do. Be prepared. Don't just come up with this basic extension problem that can be applied to everything, because and to me it seemed a little bit lazy. And this was me who hadn't had this explained to me. And then one day I just had this penny drop moment where I was like, actually no, if a pupil can write a really good question on it, their depth of understanding is really, really, really deep. Whereas if they think that a harder question is just increasing the size of the numbers, like when a year 7 child comes up to you and goes, oh, what's 3 million times 4? And you're like, 12 million. And like, wow, you can do really big numbers. And I'm like, that's not how you make something difficult. Maybe that's why it's because as an inexperienced teacher who hasn't maybe had backward fading explained quite so well, a backward faded worksheet, you're basically just looking at it and going, why would I give this to the kids? It's half completed. And if you don't explain this well to the kids about why you're doing it, the kids can look at it and go, oh, winner, sirs don't thirst for 3 parts of it. I've only got to do the last one. And so you can get into a really poor mindset. And I mean, I was listening to the Tips for Teachers podcast earlier about do nows. And the first bit of advice was explain to the kids why you're doing what you're doing. At which point you explain, I mean, you give kids the learning behaviors that you want. You're exposing them to the learning behaviors that you want them to have. And as a result, by telling them why you're doing what you're doing, they become better learners, even if maybe you didn't actually do what you were trying to do. Like if you explain that you do nows are always retrieval practice and the benefits of retrieval practice, and maybe what you're doing isn't exactly retrieval practice, but they go away and they think about the spacing effect and they write down what they've done, they space it out for, the next day and the next week, and then a month later, and then 3 months later in their revision plan. And eventually they become better learners because you explained it to them. And so, that's probably beneficial to do with kids as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan of simple questions that can be generalized across a whole range of different ideas that can just be that quick little extension for those quick graspers and quick finishers. I think they're so valuable. One, because actually I think they make them think a lot more than just an additional worksheet of, either just at worst, more of the same that they've already done, which isn't really, moving their thinking on forward, versus then obviously, teacher prep time, particularly in the primary context where they've got to do so many. So I remember I was doing a conference for some ECTs, I think it was last week. We're looking at hinge questions about adaptive teaching, and this a common question that came up was, well, what do you do then for those kids who get those multiple choice hinge questions, correct, quite quickly? And just say, well, the easiest thing to do is just say, right, we'll come up with your own question on the same thing and think carefully about the distractors that you might provide to see if you can trick me, or, you might whisper them, this answer is correct. Can you write another question where actually option D is the correct answer? Or can you write a quick little sentence or two explaining why a child may have said C was the answer and not what you said it was? And just like those 3 little things, small, quick little prompts that you can give out, and you can apply that logic to any well-designed multiple choice question that's going to keep them busy and thinking hard for an age, certainly long enough for a hinge question should be pretty short and sharp anyway, long enough for them to be engaged in thinking rather than just twiddling their thumbs. So yeah, big fan of simple little questions like that actually big benefit, I think, in terms of when you're thinking through that ratio lens of what children are actually thinking about when you get them to do certain things in the classroom.
So just on that extension prompt, I'm assuming that the depth of understanding that you get from the distractors is the thing that you can then go and say to those kids, actually, your distractors aren't very distracting. Like if you were doing geography and you were to ask them, the multiple choice question is, what's the capital of Australia? And they were to write London, Paris, Munich, and Canberra. Like, kids are going to get that right, even though they have no idea that Canberra is the capital of Australia. Whereas if that instead said Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, and another Australian
Darwin. I think that's how it was that state. I don't know.
Who knows? That's a better depth of understanding in the capital of Australia.
Exactly. And again, it's just a quick little thing you can put in your pocket, and as I say, works for I think I've not thought deeply enough about it, but I think it's kind of one of those little question prompts that does transcend all the subjects.
Yeah, we used to have the final question on our retrieval practice would have been a confidence-weighted multiple choice question, and the expectation that anyone who got that far could explain why the distractors had been chosen, and they would be asked during the review section, so you could almost guarantee they were getting challenged in that way. So whenever you were speaking, and I'm totally 100% with that. We could probably talk about this all night, but we've got families to go back to, and Neil's got to find out where Shannon is.
She has arrived home safely. I heard it.
All that's left to do is say thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much, Neil.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
And to everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.